I'm going to tell you a little bit about UX Storytelling 101, how to organize a little bit of your findings for your users. It sounds like you've got a good user talk after this as well. So maybe perhaps you can use some of these things to organize your findings. And then how to turn that back around and play it back to your teams and your stakeholders in order to use it as your secret weapon. So hello and welcome again from Austin, Texas. You guys can see my favorite football team, Austin FC, over here. I've got it nice and proud on the door so you guys can see. Apologies for that spooky first slide. I promise the rest of it will be less spooky, but there is a point. I do have one there at the end. But first, my name is Heather, or H for the cool kids. I'm a UX lead at IBM, and I'm also the host of Design Share for all of IBM software. A really cool thing that we do where designers can just come together on their own free will and kind of show stuff that they're working on. It's meant to make us all better by learning from each other. So that's really the energy I try to carry to these types of things, of just sharing information, collaborating, and really getting to know each other and getting to learn from each other. It's what I really love. I have about 7 years experience, all the way from marketing to software networking and edge computing where I work now. Big jump, big difference, seen a lot, which is great. But one thing that kind of has spanned across this is that I love stories. All types of stories. I love listening to stories. I love telling stories. I love reading stories. I love Dungeons and Dragons, video games. I mean, you name it. I love stories. I partake in them constantly. I find a lot of inspiration from them. I believe that they do a really good job of connecting us to each other, both generationally and interpersonally. I think they can teach us lessons and morals if done right, frighten us. I remember when I was 5 years old, this was the scariest thing I'd ever seen. They can also do things like teach us empathy. Sorry, this is getting some of the saddest moments I've seen, and bring us closer together when we're feeling sad or feeling down and feeling like we need a little bit of friendship. And what I think they do, if done well, and what I strive for, is to remind us of the greatness in each other and the accomplishments that we can have as individuals and both collectively as a team as well. And I feel like we can bring that to user stories, right? You know, I'm always sitting in work and I'm working on my personas and I'm building all of the documents and I'm wondering, you know, how well are these translating? You know, why don't we bring this same sort of emotion, pacing, and character development to our own user stories that we do in things like video games, movies, you know, all of those types of things. Why can't we bring that to our own user stories, that same sort of eloquence? I think we can, actually. And that's what I'm prepared to try to show you here today. So normally, at least in my experience, and yours may look like this, it may look a little bit different, but users have some sort of persona card that looks a little something like this. Generally, they've been categorized into a certain area. For instance, in Jurassic Park, our product here today, Alan Grant is a shareholder requirement. The shareholders are not feeling too confident about the safety of the park and actually having visitors in there. So before they open the park up to everybody, there's going to be this shareholder requirement of taking these folks through the park for a first-time experience to see how they do and see how the park does, right? So everyone's really excited. You can kind of imagine being the shoes of a product designer here and like, heck yeah, I'm excited to test this thing out and get it approved. So you might create some persona cards like this. We've got name, archaeologist is his job. His main tasks are finding and maintaining dinosaur dig sites, educating youth about velociraptors, and approving theme parks for public safety. Turns out this guy does this. We've got some opportunities for him because he's feeling pessimistic about the whole thing. He's a little worried he's going to get replaced. He's in this new industry might make the industry he's currently in a little outdated. So he's got his guards up. So we want to make him a subject matter expert, and we want to make sure that we give him the proper onboarding so he feels good with joining us on this journey. You probably know a thing or two like that. You've probably seen something like that. And I kind of call these little bits of details, which I just told you a lot from this. And if you've seen Jurassic Park, maybe you're smiling over there. But I told you a lot from that off this sheet of paper, right? So I almost kind of consider that to be our stick figure. Just the persona themselves. We know we've got a person, we know we've got a user, we know they do things, right? But we don't necessarily know what those are yet, maybe. We also know that they work with other people and they do things with other people, and those other people have got needs and they've got things they're focused on, and they've got deliveries and deliverables they've got to give to folks. Who are those people? We also know that people are, there's, contextually, we're sitting somewhere while we're at work, whether that be at home, whether that be in an office, whether that be outside. We know that people are outside doing things, and we know they're interacting with the product while they're in their environment, as well as the tools they use. So all of these things we know exist, right? But they don't always necessarily fit on that persona card. It's almost about expanding the persona card itself and expanding what it could be, right? So what if we could take something like a persona card, like you see on the left, and really focus on its development over time. Again, this is something you'll hear here in a second, that this is something where I'm proposing it can be done over time. It's probably hard to do quickly, but if you're with a product for 2-3 years, this might be something you could do over time. With those contextual details, elaborating on pain points, bringing human relatability to your story, and telling it through a hero's lens. Then I think you go from something that goes from just this, or the persona card, into being something a bit more visual, something people can watch, something people can identify with or empathize with. This is Alan Grant, the first time he's entering our park, when we've first shown him the dinosaurs, and you can see the awe and expectation on his face. He did not expect this here today. And that's something that we could really start to convey with details over time. You can see the vehicle he's in, the other players on screen. You can see that he's in a tropical environment. It might be a rainy day. There are all of these details outside of his just astonishment that we're kind of looking at and we're hoping to strive for eventually over time. So how do we do it? Well, shameless plug, I work at a place called IBM, and we have design thinking. I'm sure that wherever you work or where you've gone to school, you have something similar. This is not something new. Design thinking exercises are pretty common. I'll be speaking from the perspective of the IBM ones. Translate it to you. If you have your own design exercises, perhaps there's overlap. If there's not, hey, these are open source. You can use them at any time, so feel free to do so. But one thing that I love about IBM that I just fell in love with over time was this idea of the loop, this infinity loop of observing your users in their environment, reflecting on your findings, making something from that, and then taking it back to the beginning, testing it, observing, reflecting, and making again. It's obvious in its implementation. It's a loop. It's never ending. It's infinity. But what I love about it, and what I enjoy about taking the time to create a visual like this, is that it implies time spent. It implies that you as a designer are spending time observing your users, getting data from that, and then spending that time to reflect. I think sometimes we can move really quickly through research and data points. And almost sometimes we can say, I'd love to have this at the beginning of the project rather than it be iterative. I truly believe that the best outcomes that we can get from products are when we observe constantly, reflect, and make, when we continue this loop and we constantly are interacting with our users, building things, getting it wrong and getting it out of the way to build the right thing. What's great about it at IBM is that we have a ton of different design thinking exercises, which makes it easy. These create templates per se, things that you are grabbing data. Let's say it's a ton of Post-it notes, right? We all love Post-it notes. You're just user data, imagine it in a Post-it note. All of that data has to go somewhere. It has to go into a thing. If you don't organize it, if you don't make it shareable, and you don't provide a template that is universal, that people can latch onto, it's just going to be a lot of data without a lot of organization or insight. And that's not what we want to strive for, right? So here today, what I'm hoping to do is take you through a few design thinking exercises and a few storytelling things to kind of think about how can we take it to the next level? How can we gather information, organize it, and then play it back to folks in a way that is engaging and makes people have fun, makes people happy to be learning about their users? Because I truly do believe that if you can get a whole team rallying around a user, you create a better product. But there's always a little bit of a barrier sometimes in trying to get everybody on that board of thinking, right? And making sure that everyone has the same social understanding of what we're doing. So here's some tips and tricks to do it. So for one, we've already talked about our product today is going to be Jurassic Park. And well, let's identify our characters. So number one, we've got our personas. So the persona card is a great first step, in my opinion. And you'll realize with this talk, it's a lot about just carving something out. More writing, less talking, but a lot of talking and a lot of writing, right? Because we want to capture things, and we want to make sure that we're not losing any information. It can be iterated on over time, but we want to just make sure we're not losing it. So You've got folks like Alan Grant, Ellie Grant, and Ian Malcolm. These are our shareholder requirements. These people have to say yes to our part before we can go into the next step of getting it ready for the general public, before we can get to our GA. So we've got our archaeologists, our paleobotanists, and our mathematician for chaos theory. Eventually, over time, as you start to build out your users and their different sections, you might just have 3 of these. You might have 10, 20, 30. I've seen people have 100. It's crazy. And it really just depends on your product and how wide it is, right? That's a lot of stuff to organize. So the next step I would take if it was my product was I'd start to look at all the different teams, the roles, and the connections between them. So you can see that we've got this linear experience. John Hammond is our CEO. We've got the legal team, the R&D team, the shareholder requirements, our target audience, people eventually that we hope come to this park, our IT team, our Dino team, vet team, auto team, and our potential disruptors, the ones to watch out for, and of course, our corporate espionage spies. So these are all people that would essentially have a persona card. These two would kind of work together, because you can't really take in all this information at once, right? So this is really about the progressive disclosure of this information. So how do you do it? Well, I've talked about organizing it in a shareable medium. And I think that's one of the most important things. I think I see folks sometimes keep a lot of deliverables on their computer and they only present it in a screen share, which is great. It's great that you bring yourself up and talk about it, as you always should. But I think what I've noticed is that at times it's easier for folks to digest a thing on their own, to maybe jump into something after a conversation with some context and be able to digest it on their own. And the goal of creating a story is to have an audience and people that understand the tenets of your landscape, right? So that's why we want to create it in a shareable medium. So here I've created just a mural board. There's Miro, there's Figma, there's Envision, there's, you name it, there's a dozen, right? This is one I've used in Mural. And the point of this mural is to be organized and to capture our personas over time. So how do we do that? Well, first, we got to give people a landing. We think of this as a website, right? Because we don't know who's going to be looking at this. It might not always be with us. It might be people that are coming in after the fact, right? So we give a purpose to capture the data around user personas of Jurassic Park. Note, this is a living document and is meant to be shared. And if you have any questions, contact h@jurassicpark.com. Pretty simple, right? And in addition with that, we got to have our own onboarding. So I know for me, folks in my product management team aren't necessarily in our design tools all the time. They might not understand exactly what they need to do or how they use these things or where the conversation was last. And every facilitation board I do, every shareable document like this, I always have an onboarding section with any relevant links or any level setting that I can give to folks. So they'll be in the right mindset while they look at this. If we have, documentation or YouTube videos or or an as-is video, something that, gives people the grounding they need to read the rest of this page correctly. You want to include that stuff. I also include things like Mural Tutorials, which may seem unnecessary. I've noticed that you don't really want to call people out and say, does anyone not know how to use Mural? You probably won't get a lot of answers with that. What I do is I offer it to people and I say, if you need it, just read it and you can follow the instructions. No one will say anything, but what I do see is people over there clicking when I'm in facilitation, when I'm presenting things. So it's good to give people a chance to learn on their own and digest things at their own pace, which is great. And of course, this one seems obvious, but maybe it's not always. Map out sections. So if people are looking for something specific, they can use that Command F or their eyeballs to quickly find what the information. I know this one seems obvious, but it's not always. So I just wanted to call it out. It's something I find especially important. And then again, with that progressive disclosure. So we've got the persona cards. You can see that to the right, we've got empty persona cards. So if I'm ever in a conversation or a collaboration with a teammate, I can go ahead and we can build one here on the fly if we need to, right? And you might already have these personas. You might not yet. They might be sitting somewhere in a file and haven't been looked at in 5 years. You might need to dust them off. You might need to go out and make them yourself. It really depends. But whichever you have, let's try to get them into a place together where we can start learning about it and start giving that progressive disclosure so folks can get an idea of who personas are and how they map together. So to sum this one up, and again, this is stuff we probably already know, but it's the organization. But to sum it up, we want to create or get familiar with our personas. again, whether they're living somewhere in a closet or they're out on the boards every single day, if you don't know your personas or their teammates don't know your personas, you should be screaming their names from the rooftops. And that's really what we want to go for here. Get familiar with them. You should be the steward. You and your research team should be the steward of your personas and your users. Establish a standard template for persona types. Very much the same as we have UX reading, right? You don't want folks having to readjust to different templates. You don't want them having to read a different format constantly. If you can reduce that level of eye noise for them while they're reading and have one template that's standard, they'll be able to digest that information a lot quicker. Map out those connections. We know that the CEO needs the shareholder requirements, needs legal to approve. We know that the target audience is going to be interested in the archaeologists that are there. There's connections between these people in that form. Document them, keep them top of mind, and iterate on them as you go. And then organize that information in a shareable format. I'm going to say that probably 80 times because I think that's the biggest part of creating a story, is making sure that you bring everybody along. Whether that be your sales team, your marketing team, your IT team, your dev team, your UI front end team, or the rest of your design team. You don't want this to be siloed just to your design section and the people that quote unquote care about personas, right? You want this to even go to the people that don't look at personas or even know what they are. If they're on your team, they have insight about your users, even if they don't know it. And it's your job to help pull that information out and construct the story. So step 2, build the scene. So we've talked a lot about our stick figures. Pretty simple. That's kind of what the last one was, right? We know a little bit of their names, what their needs are, pain points, things like that. We started to construct a person, an idea of a person. And the next thing we want to do is construct their environment. So how do we do that? Well, it's pretty simple. We want to ask things like environmental details. I find that people miss this one a lot. Are they working in an office? Are they working from home? Are they sitting all day? Are they standing all day? If they're outside, do they have heavy equipment? Do they have things they need to carry? Are there water and bathroom breaks? There's so much detail you can get outside of your product just from understanding the environment that your user is in while they're using it. And again, these are the contextual details that we start to build around your user to help create the story. You can also understand things like tools and associated products. Jeep Wrangler, night goggles, these are all things that come, there's a purpose that these tools were selected and there's an association there. There's probably a whole world in your product that is ready to be unveiled. For me, I work in networking, so everything's hard. And basically, I don't know, or I used to not know a lot of what the tools were that my personas are using. I had to learn a lot about VPCs and VMs and all that kind of stuff and the evolution of software networking. And that's helped me immensely in being able to storytell and how we got to where we are in software networking, just by learning about the tools that my users are using and really taking the time to understand what those are and why those are. Also gives you more time to discuss the emotional state of your users. I discussed it a little bit, but are they outside all day? Is it hot? Are they, is the Jeep Wrangler not having AC because of that? Or, are there dinosaurs in the background and they're just freaking out a little bit, It's really a place where you can start to, more than just what they're doing and a one sentence of what they're thinking and they're feeling and that kind of stuff, you can really start to understand more complex details and the white space of their morning and their day after they're done interacting with your product. Who are they as a person, And it's a generalized thing, right? Because not everyone's the same, but there's a level of stress and anxiety that they might experience in their day that could be universal across their job type. I see a lot in healthcare. And then we also got things like moments of delight, moments to impress. I showed that earlier in the GIF. It's the first moment Alan Grant sees a dinosaur, and it's this one grabbing from the tree. That's a moment of delight. We planned that on purpose so Alan Grant would be delighted. His first interaction with giraffes, it disarmed him. It made him realize he was in a place bigger than himself, and he had to reevaluate and readjust. That was the goal of that dinosaur, right? And then we had some mishaps and opportunities for improvement with our T-Rex, who escaped and did eat half of the tour. So, you know, things like that. You really start to build what gets to be a use case. And use cases are so important. And I didn't know this until I had a colleague of mine that wouldn't even start a conversation until he had defined a use case with our architect team. Because what he was able to do was make sure we didn't spin our wheels constantly designing for every possible outlier issue that we could. We got to stay focused, right? At least for building the first thing, right? And it also simplified the experience enough for everyone in the room to understand. And in something like networking or edge computing, that can be vital to our success as designers of just, is this something that we can put contextually in human forms? This is you know, that people associate with every day, not this nuanced world of networking that we can then design for that. So bringing it back to the board, right? This thing is a living document. You want to constantly have your assets grow on this board. So you can see we've got our section, we've got our title, and we've got our use case. Dinosaurs have just been brought back to life by scientists, and the CEO would like the world to be able to visit this amazing accomplishment. In order to gain licensing, shareholders have asked Alan and Ellie Grant and Ian Malcolm to experience the first time Jurassic Park. The goal is to create a seamless park experience for the safety team, the CEO's grandchildren, and park legal while they venture through the park for the very first time. So that's our use case, pretty simple. It's something that can be evolved on, but it covers the dimensions of what our goal is. We're not designing all of Jurassic Park. We're not designing the gift shop right now. We're not designing the water section right now. We're just trying to get these people through this initial onboarding experience to get a thumbs up to open the park, right? Keeps it simple, keeps it focused. So then to build off of that, you're gonna want something like an as-is experience. Again, you might call this something different. At IBM, we call it the as-is. We've got yellow Post-its for the steps, and then we've got blue Post-its for blue sky opportunities, and red, or the pink Post-its for pain points. And this is something that hopefully you're doing with a larger team. You could just be doing it with your design team. That's absolutely fine. But the goal is to be a little bit collaborative. And the Post-it notes really help with that, because what you allow is everyone has free reign to double click the screen and add a step. And then afterwards, you can kind of organize and collectively talk about the steps to make sure you've nailed all of them. But again, what we're trying to do with these deliverables is bring everybody into the story so we can gather as much contextual details as possible, right? Because that helps us build our story better. So we've got guests arrive at the park, taken through the onboarding experience, it's Velociraptor shock time, dinner with chili and sea bass, you know, the guests meet and greet, electric Jeep tour, T-Rex sighting, and then of course, this is where it goes downhill. The guests go off course, fences go down, guests are misplaced, the electricity is lost, but perhaps potential for an interactive electricity quest for guests. And Jurassic Park is not approved. And if you're anything like my team, product management will not allow this, is generally what gets put on something like that. So it's your as-is experience. It's the one that's broken. And it gives everyone a chance from their different silos, whether it be sales or product management, architects, UI front end, whoever it is, it gives everyone a chance to put in their piece of the pie of the things they know about users, because I guarantee you, your team knows different things. And if you're wanting to bring these in with these exercises. And what's great about it is it's an exercise that can evolve over time. We had the first initial Post-its that were pretty simple. We started to divide them into day 1, day 2, day 3. An IBM thing where we talk about our first time experience, when they know it a little bit more. And then when they're really starting to learn it, it helps us divide and from onboarding into usage into being a pro, right? You can start asking questions about what they're doing, what they're thinking, what they're feeling, and add more nuance to it, add more Post-its. What's great about this is it can get as big as you want, you can have as much as you want. But what you're, again, trying to do is capture that data with your teams. If you're not doing it out in the field, right? Do it with your teams after the fact, but make sure that the findings that you get are organized. That's what you're hoping for. And with that, I've learned that you can also develop a shared language. That's really important. And this one often gets missed, but if you can create a shared language with your team, it's again, you're setting up the pieces to create your story. Shared language, shared contextual environmental tenets, shared pain points, shared opportunities, shared flows of understanding. That's how, when you go out to tell your story, you've created a world with people, and that's how they're able to understand it. And a shared future. So when we get into it, it's the loop again, right? It's observing, reflecting, and making constantly. And that's the thing, is that this is iterative. This board you make, this shareable document, these these exercises you do, these facilitation, these research sessions with users, all of them are iterative. You should be doing them again and again and again and again, and building off your insights from the time before. And the more you can do it, the better insights you'll get. I guarantee it. So to sum this one up, step 2 of building a scene, you want to ask about environment and contextual questions in that way. You want to ask about associated tools and products and the emotional state of your users. Really zero in on that emotional state. Look for blue sky opportunities, pain points, what went wrong. Really zoom in on where the negatives are, how we can turn those into positives, right? And highlight those pain points and opportunities. Establish a use case so everyone is speaking in the same set of events that we need for this day, for this problem. Document and involve an as-is flow. That as-is flow can grow and grow and grow. Every time you talk to another user, every time you talk to another colleague, that list can grow. And encourage a shared social understanding. That's going to be most helpful. If you come out of the blue with users, folks aren't going to know what you're talking about. So you got to make sure you create that shared understanding. And lastly, tell the story. What I've been trying to encourage here is that much in the same way that a writer has influence or inspiration or pieces that they can grab from in the real world to construct their novels or their movies, these are your pieces. And you can build as many as you want. You can capture as many as you want. You can talk to as many users as you want. And what you're getting is a bunch of data that you then need to organize and create into sections, structured sections, these templates. So that way, when you're trying to synthesize and grab the high level pieces from each one of these exercises, you know what you're talking about. And you're able to say, I have my characters, I know their setting, I know what they're interacting with, and I know their current struggle. And then you can kind of start to think about, well, how do all of these things fit together? How do I tell this story? Where is this going, right? And that is a perfect time to try to create your 2B. Your 2B experience is what you hope it to be. It'll be your North Star. And again, hopefully you've worked with users, hopefully you've worked with colleagues on this and other teams, so you have a shared understanding of what your future can be, right? So day 1, the guests are arrived in lunchtime to process. We're going to offer them lunch this time because they needed a break after that initial onboarding. We're going to take them through the onboarding science ride. And then instead of them evacuating the seats themselves, we're going to include some science time with R&D. We'll actually invite them into the lab. We'll do the velociraptor, no cow this time. And then we'll have dinner. We're keeping the Chilean sea bass. Morning brunch, because we didn't feed them on their second day. What were we thinking? Guest meet and greet, electric Jeep tour, T-Rex lunchtime, and picnic with the Triceratops. End of Jeep tour, dinner. Day 3, we go into morning brunch. We can start thinking about our sea creature tour, the big sea creature show, lunch, a visit to the gift shop, guest goodbye happy hour, a helicopter plane ride, Jurassic Park is approved, potential for a San Diego exhibit. So you create this with your team. And you kind of can capture the future as far as their understanding, and you can use features, you can use functions, you can use requirements. There's multiple ways to define a 2B flow, a ton of ways to do it. But what you want to do is kind of get traction with your team, with your colleagues, with your users to create this North Star, and then use it to tell the story. So simple little graphic here that I found online of the hero's journey. You've got your part 1, call to adventure, part 2, supreme ordeal initiation, part 3, unification and transformation, and part 4, road back / hero's return. I mean, it's super simple. Part 1 is your call to adventure. It's your user and their as is. Where are they at currently? What are they doing? Why are they doing it? What's their problem? The next one is the persona connections. Who are they working with? Who are their bosses? Who do they not get along with? Who's helping them? How are we helping them? What do we want to help them with? The third one is selected pain points and opportunities. This is their approach and their ordeal and their big journey moment of traversing the bad. How do we highlight that here? And the 2B flow is the road back, the hero's return. We're going to make it better for them. How do we do that? Well, the answer is it takes time. And it takes you collecting the pieces, and it takes you practicing. It takes you doing it a lot, and it takes you maybe being bad at it a couple of times, to be honest. I've definitely been bad at it. I have another story to share for later. But what you want to do is do it a lot so you can identify when people are engaged, moments when folks are disinterested, places where your story goes on too long, which I'm sure I've had a couple of those, and opportunities to explain more clearly. You want to, based off those findings, you want to create outlines, scripts, talking points, and schedule the meetings, right? You want to be the one, like, let's talk about our users. You're in a meeting and they're saying, what do we think about this? What do we know about them? Bring up your mural, bring it up, be the steward. And also make it fun and engaging. I've done it simply with just a little bit of like using emojis, a ton of Jurassic Park references, and GIFs. So these are things that you can bring to your presentations that help alleviate the mood, and help people laugh, feel comfortable, relate to the content that you're presenting. And lastly, bring this up all the time. I said it once, I will say it again, because this is the most important. You are the steward. You're going to tell the story a million times, hopefully. And by the millionth time, you're going to have that story nailed and you'll have people listening. And what you want to do is use the tenets of storytelling combined with the data that you receive from research, from colleagues, from your teammates, from workshops, whatever it is. And you want to infuse that into a narrative that folks can latch onto and understand. Because what you can do when you tell the story is you can have folks be more engaged and start to view your users as more than just the clicks on the GUI. Actually view them as people walking around in the world, living, breathing, who want to go home and clock out at night and have had a good, successful day at work. And that is what we hope to do with telling the story for our designers. And that is it for me, everybody. Oh, it's the Velociraptor, 100%. I think, yep, definitely. I think they are the star of the show. And I love how smart they made them. And I think that was a fun little science quirk they didn't mean to do. So definitely my favorite character. Absolutely. So I have not always been a great public speaker, and it's a skill that you learn over time. And I remember I was telling this actually to my mentor recently. One of my first presentations, I was working at a company called T3, and I had to do a presentation to Allstate for some user findings. And I was probably fresh off being an intern, so I was jittery, I was nervous. It was Allstate, it's like, oh my gosh, this is a huge company, and I was just so anxious. And so I had to give it probably about a 4 or 5 minute presentation as part of a larger deck. And oh my gosh, I remember I got in there, I wrote out every single word for word. I had an actual script, and highlighted, and I was going to read it. That was my plan. I wasn't able to go off script yet. And when the moment came, my anxiety got so high. I literally was just like, I grabbed my notebook and I put my head on the desk and I read under the desk, and I actually presented. Luckily, it was over phone, and this was before the WebEx days and Zoom days. So they didn't see it, but everyone in the room with me did. And so I got through it and I presented it, and I was level 11 anxious, but I got through it. And so that's always one I love to tell, where in that moment, I wouldn't have been able to construct pieces together with storytelling at all. I really was just trying to work on speaking. So it kind of gets to this place of I really look at it as, building over time. And that's really what this talk was kind of meant to do, is like, you might not be able to do this next week out of the gate. But if you iterate on it, you do the loop, you build over time, you'll get better at it. And eventually you'll be able to tell a Jurassic Park story with a bunch of GIFs and funny clowns and stuff. And it makes it easier. So one of my favorites is, of course, just in-person user sessions. If you can get them, I mean, that's the best. Actually going out into the field or having some sort of research lab where folks can come in, and if you've got a GUI or a product, they can actually play with it. You can listen to them, potentially in their own environment, actually getting to do that. That was something that colleagues and I did for Amazon one time. We actually got to go into people's homes who sell on Facebook Marketplace. And we actually got to see their setup and, how they stack their boxes. It's a whole thing that these home sellers do to kind of keep their inventory top notch and everything. And so we got a ton of learnings from that, right? So in my opinion, that's one of the best ways, if you can. Other things that I know folks use when we don't have actual users that we can talk to is things like Usertesting.com, which I think you can get pretty quick feedback on, where you kind of just enter a few questions you have and places that you would like users to click. I think they can do eye tracking, they can do the clicks, time spent, and that kind of stuff. You get a little bit of a Word document of findings. That's something that my researcher does quite often when it's time to validate something that we've built and we don't have a user to talk to about it. Yes, and honestly, they probably tell me more than I ask. So it's the kind of part of my job to kind of present these findings in a story. And so oftentimes I'll get things wrong. Maybe I'll get a nuance or a detail wrong. With networking, there's just so many moving parts. With a lot of our products are like that. Where there's just so much going on. You might get a detail or a word wrong here or there, right? And so I'm lucky enough to work with architects that are A, understanding of when that happens, and B, are very collaborative on the decks we build in the first place. So by the time I'm presenting it, we've kind of already shared it around with a few people that'll make sure that I'm gonna be doing well by the time I present it. And then afterwards, I've had people, I had to do a thing called a playback zero recently for a product I'm working on, where it's like the vision of where the product's going to go. I presented to a bunch of people I don't talk to on a daily basis, but are still on my larger team. At IBM, we can have pretty large teams across different silos. And so I presented it to my larger team, which is probably like 100 and something people, people that I don't work with every single day. And what was great about that was a ton of people reached out to me afterwards with advice. Just through email with advice, or, I really liked this part, but I felt like this one could have been better. And that's what's really great about the team that I work on, is that they are collaborative enough to kind of just give me that feedback and let me know, hey, this went on a little long. You probably could like insert something about this here, and that might make it better. Or, you kind of crossed your wires on what these two things are, because that happens all the time. So yeah, I'm very lucky with receiving feedback from my coworkers on that. It's a struggle sometimes, I will say. And I think there are moments where you have to kind of prove that the proof is in the pudding, is kind of how I always put it. I have definitely had folks that, are why we're doing engineering. Why are we simplifying this down into this dumb use case, and you kind of have to go through that a couple of times. It's the conversation almost repeats itself, and you have to repeat yourself, and you have to keep that boundary high. That was what I learned this year, actually. You have to make sure that you are advocating for these practices, because they are what work. They are what work. A lot of times our users don't understand our products as deeply as we do. They don't understand code. They don't understand networking. They don't understand a lot of things. They're going to need a simplified version, right? And that's what we hope to provide for them. And so what I've always said is, one thing that a coworker of mine did that I found was really effective to bring people along when they're adverse to it, is every time we met with folks and it was time to build something, we did the use case first, always. And it was a simple one. And it went in a GitHub ticket, and it went in the Mural. And it was always the first thing we talked about. We didn't do anything else till we defined the use case together. And after a while, I really started to see the connection being made of, okay, so from here, we went down and made a bunch of screens. Okay, I can see how these two things are connected. And so what we believe in on our team is working in person a lot. So we live wire, we do facilitation. And so what we're trying to do is prove the effectiveness in real time while we're in these meetings. We build the use case, we build the simplified understanding, we map out the requirements or the features that are associated with that. We create our guardrails. And then we head down and we say, well, let's bring our first user. What steps are they going to be taking in their as is? So literally what I just took you through is how we make it happen. We build these things in front of them, and then they're starting to have conversation. And that's really when I think the light bulb goes off. When you can get people out from behind the screen talking, especially like architects, like talking about this stuff. And then it's a post-it note, and then it's a flow, and then it's screens. Wait, how did we do this? I feel like that's how a lot of people feel after our sessions. And the way we do that is we have 3-hour-long sessions a week where we just get in a Mural and we build out, in the simplest form, we build out screens together. So everyone feels like they have input and everyone is contributing. I found that's one of the easiest way to bring them along with storytelling, is show them the evolution of the things you're doing. And then they get to the playback and they're like, oh my gosh, I didn't realize this little use case in a Mural was going to end up being this big thing. So very quickly, because I know I'm over time, bring it up constantly. You are always bringing it up in meetings. Anytime you're talking about a new flow, bring up the Mural board so people know it exists. Send it out to people anytime they're asking, hey, what do we got about users? I'll have people reach out that I've never really met in marketing that are like, I don't have anything about users. I'll send it over. This is exactly what we have about users. Please contact me or so-and-so if you have any other questions. And also scheduling workshops. They're daunting. They're overwhelming for sure. But the conversation you can get out of a good 3-hour workshop where you get everyone in the room and a curated set of design thinking exercises, the conversation you can get can elicit so many opportunities and pain points that people will be along for the ride once they kind of realize that's the outcome of what you're doing. And you might have to do it a couple of times before people realize that's the outcome of what you're doing. And so I think one of the biggest points is bringing everyone along. And so for me, product management, my engineers, my architects, and design, we have meetings called like 4 in a box. First off, for our higher ups. So they all are always talking about the mission together, and that's product management, design, and the architects. So they added one more. I think it might be sales. It used to be 3 in a box. Now it's 4 in a box. You can tell I haven't caught up. But it used to be 3 in a box. Now it's 4 in the box. So those people are meeting once a week to discuss what the product's doing and keeping each other abreast of updates, right? The second thing for me is I wouldn't be able to do anything without my product manager and my engineers. I feel so beholden to them in some ways because they know the things so much more than I do in some ways, right? And so for me, it's like every meeting I have, every playback I have, every mural, every workshop, they're invited. This is never just design. It's never just us working just with customers or just with users and just design. We always have at least one person in the room to represent everyone that has a shared interest in this. So the way that works for us is our product management is in our, can be in our AI sessions. Sometimes they come, sometimes they don't. They're definitely in our playbacks. They're kind of at the hip with us a lot. It can be difficult at times. They're not always there because obviously I know product managers are super busy and they have a lot of organization they have to do. I do not envy it. So thank you, sir, for being a product manager because it is very difficult. And so they stay up with us. And in the middleman, I would say, is that we have documentation. So every product at IBM has like just a heavy documentation like most products do out in the world, right? And I'd say that's our middleman sometimes because sometimes I can't get answers from my architects or my PMs, but it's in the documentation or with the documentation team. But yeah, I'll have 6 meetings a week with architects, my documentation team, PMs, and things like that, just to discuss like the design changes we're making when we're in like a hot and heavy building time, definitely. Relatability, personability, and excitement. Letting people know that these users are human beings, just like the rest of us, trying to, do their job well, feel success, and not be irritated at the end of the day. I think that's one of the biggest things. Those contextual details really bring so much relatability to our users and really let people know, oh, I'm designing more than just a bad pattern. If I design a bad pattern, like I'm taking up 30 extra minutes of someone's day that's making them late to their train and gets them late home to their family. It's really those extra details that I think captures teams and captures people when they understand that the consequences of our bad decisions impact the goodness of our users' lives.